even a speech from the Prime Minister, the complete opposite to Tony Blair. This isn't things can only get better, it's things can only get worse.
Information, some of it to do with foreign interference, and I do think, yes, well, you may laugh at it, but that happens to be correct as well.
Chair, I generally find the best ideas in life come from pubs, so it's no particular surprise that Michael Westwood is indeed a publican. Representing Clacton, we were third.
Before I continue with the debate, can I just bring to everyone's attention that guests in the gallery are not permitted to contribute in any way to the debate, that any member who speaks needs to stay for wind-ups, and we will be on a very tight time of 6 minutes per speech. And can I please encourage colleagues to make short interventions, or there will be people who will not be able to speak at the end of the debate. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 700143 relating to a general election. I call Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Harris, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I start off by saying that petitions normally in our Parliament have been used often to discuss a particular issue of concern to people in the country. I have to say it's not normally used as a mechanism to hijack and play party politics. In the last 14 years, we saw crisis after crisis caused by the ill-thought policies and plans and the rank coronerism of the previous government. But unlike that, we engaged in the process, we had debates, we did not commandeer a public petition to demand a new election. We opposed the government, we worked within the parliamentary ambit to do what was right. This petition has grown, some of it to do with a lot of misinformation, some of it to do with foreign interference, and I do think, yes, well, you may laugh at it, but that happens to be correct as well. Ms Harris, we found, when we took over the government, I want to make some points and then I'll take intervention. We found that when Labour got elected, they found the first thing was £20 billion of deficit, a big black hole, which no one knew about. So therefore, of course, we had to take decision to actually... Ms Harris, I would... Oh, do you know what? You can try to shout and scream, whatever. I'm not going to give up, so let me speak, please, whoever is making the noises. Right. 20 billion black hole. Obviously, therefore, the government had to take some policies in order to plug that black hole. And that means about rising the winter fuel, it means introducing inheritance tax, it means the national insurance contribution, things that people have been mentioning in the petition. You have to recognise that if you're going to provide services, if you're going to bring changes into the country, it does require financial expenditure, and a 20 billion deficit was not one anyone knew about. Now, when we took over, we found that our prisons were incredibly overcrowded. The government had said that they would find 20,000 prison places by mid-20s, but they only created 50. In our criminal justice system, we've had victims waiting for trial in serious cases in the Crown Court, about at least 7,300 of them. But what we had when the Conservatives were in power, we had about, I think, 8 different Secretary of States for Justice. Therefore, not surprising that our judicial system and prison system is in a complete mess at the moment. In relation to the NHS, I can remember in 2010 when we came into power, the waiting list when you went into an accident emergency in a hospital was maybe for a few hours. Now it's 8 hours, 10 hours. And of course, in order to get an operation or see a doctor, it's years now as opposed to 6 months. And again, that is because we've had
Sorry, I better cut in at this point just to introduce what's going on. I've tried. The actual debate is about 2.5 hours long, and so I've tried to summarise and get some of the the more interesting speakers. I've put a link to the whole thing if you want to listen to it all. If you have a problem sleeping, it's a good cure for insomnia. But the Labour people, they keep going on about this 20 billion black hole all of a sudden. But of course, what's forgotten is back in 2020 when we had the bug. Apparently that cost between 300 and 600 billion pounds, all the different things that were going on. So, and that was like shaking a magic money tree. Where did the money come from for that? But it just did. And obviously, of course, we're all paying for it. But anyway, I've tried to summarise as much as I can some of the more interesting things. And anyway, if you do like this sort of thing, please give it a like. And put a comment if you whether you signed the petition or not. Be interested to see what you think. Obviously, I don't really think anybody actually thought they'd get a general election, but it shows the kind of discontent, I think, in the country with this sort of thing. And please put a comment and see what you think. If this is what you thought the debate would be, if this is what you thought or not what you thought, I'm not quite sure whether it's what I thought it would be, but anyway, we'll have to see. The next general election at the moment is 2029 August, I believe. So, but we'll
Thank
see.
you very much, Madam Chair. I generally find the best ideas in life come from pubs, so it's no particular surprise that Michael Westwood is indeed a publican. Representing Clacton, we were third on the highest number of people to sign this petition. But I don't think the 8,000 people in Clacton that signed this did so just to get a fresh general election, because they knew that wouldn't happen. What they were actually expressing was a sense of utter disenchantment with the entire political system. And this debate can be used as a game of ping-pong this afternoon between the two political parties that have dominated British politics since the end of the First World War. But actually something bigger is going on out there. Have a look at the turnout. The second lowest turnout ever in a general election, despite the introduction of mass postal voting. Have a think about the fact that the Labour Party got 1/3 of the vote and 2/3 of the seats. For every Labour MP, there are 34,000 votes. For every Reform MP, 820,000 votes. When you think about that and give it some context, perhaps it's not surprising that confidence in the whole system is breaking down. Now, I have to say, having studied politics for a long time, not as long as the father of the house, obviously, but over 50 years, I can't think of a government that has seen a collapse in confidence as quickly as this one has. There are 26,000 pensioners in the constituency of Clacton alone that are losing their winter fuel allowance. They had no idea this was going to happen on the day of the general election. There are 100 family farms just in the Clacton constituency, many that I've met that frankly are in tears because they can't see how their husbandry of that land that has gone on in some cases for hundreds of years is going to be able to survive inheritance tax. And with the national insurance increases, yet another hammer blow to the men and women running small businesses in this country. They had not expected this. They were promised it wouldn't happen in the run-up to the general election. And we find that even now affects GP surgeries in the constituency and hospices close to it. So perhaps you can see why people are upset. They feel things are being done to them they didn't have realistic expectations of. But the broader problem, I think, is the economy as a whole. The economy works on confidence. People borrow money, lend money according to confidence in each other. And in the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I mean, we've got two people who look like they're going to a family funeral every day. There is an air of miserablism. Even a speech from the Prime Minister, the complete opposite to Tony Blair. This isn't things can only get better, it's things can only get worse. We are literally, yes, of course.
I don't remember the given way. When you come into a new job and you discover that there's a £22 billion black hole, I think you'd look a bit miserable as well, don't you agree?
The idea of a 22 billion black hole is nonsense. It's 2.7 trillion. The national debt is massive. It exploded over the course of the last... It increased by 2.5 times over the course of the last 14 years, and it's set to go higher still. We are in much deeper difficulty economically. Even to talk about a £22 billion black hole is not to understand the problems that we've got. We have zero growth in this country. Foreign investment into Britain. Yes, there's money coming in, but it's not coming in anywhere near the rate that we need. We have got major, major problems. And I actually believe that this government has talked us into a recession because confidence is falling to that degree. And you might note that the more rapidly legal migration rises, the more rapidly the population expands, the poorer we get as individuals. The last 2 years have seen record levels of net migration into Britain. And in 6 of the last 8 quarters, GDP per capita has fallen. And this perhaps is the issue ultimately that I think is why people voted, or 3 million of them, asked for another general election. It is the breach of trust between Westminster and the country on immigration. I'm not even discussing the boats. I'm talking about a population that has risen by over 10 million in the last 20 years. The impact of that on primary school availability, the impact of that on housing, the impact of that on people's wages, that is the ultimate breach of trust. Now, Labour have not promised anything on legal immigration at all, but they need to be aware that if net migration figures are anywhere near what they've been in the last few years, confidence in their party will fall further. I think the whole system is in need of absolute fundamental change, and I suspect that this is just a symptom, frankly, is a symptom of a much bigger cry for a different kind of politics in the United Kingdom. You can all con yourselves as much as you like. The old two-party system is breaking up before our eyes, and the next general election is going to see a very, very different Parliament. Thank you.
Well, that was Mr. Farage. It's very, very interesting, and it's also interesting to see how each MP they know all the data of how many people have signed a petition in their constituency, which is really interesting. But see this next fella, Sam Carlin. He's the MP for East Cambridgeshire. I'd be interested to know if he was your MP, and he might be your MP if you lived there.
Sam Carlin.
Whether you would re-elect him
Mrs.
next
Harris,
time.
and it's a pleasure to have you in the chair today. I spent some time thinking about whether I wanted to come and speak in this debate today. I thought to myself, on our first day back, when I've got a lot to be getting on with, have I got the mental stamina today to listen to Conservative members opposite talking about how everything was rosy and bright before Labour came to power in July, our public services were fine and all was glorious? And that's pretty much the sense we've heard from them so far this afternoon. But if that picture were true, they might not be sitting over there on the opposition benches with the lowest number of MPs ever for their party, and their lowest share of the vote too. This Labour government inherited public services on their knees, kneeling on rotten floorboards, on top of crumbling foundations, maybe with some subsidence as well. And tough decisions were always going to be needed to deal with this and deliver the change we were elected to deliver. This government has an immense mandate to do that, to deliver that change and fix the foundations of our economy and public services. With over 400 constituencies electing a Labour MP, many of them, including my own in North West Cambridgeshire, doing so for the first time. The truth is that there are no easy fixes for the deep-seated issues the Conservatives have left us. And they know that, which is why we still see that short-term attitude from the Conservatives and Reform UK, pretending there are simple solutions that we just aren't taking. They also continually admonish us for bringing up this legacy. They literally groan every time we mention their £22 billion black hole. There we go, which doesn't surprise me. I wouldn't want to talk about it either if I were them, which is exactly why we will continue to do so until this mess is fixed. Of course, they're a bit busy fighting one another and within themselves right now, which the country plainly sees. A weird Christmas argument over membership numbers between Reform and the Conservatives is just the latest episode in a long-running saga, which I have no doubt will continue, and long may it continue, as it will just help more and more of the British public to see how totally unequipped and to solve Britain's problems either of these parties are. And speaking of reform, I know the member for Clacton is here in the room, so may I take the opportunity to offer him my sympathy over the apparent loss of a very large donation for his party from overseas, following some of that recent right-wing infighting. It's a very sad consequence. Now, turning to the petition itself. I know there is frustration in this country, lots of it, about politics not delivering for people. I met so many people during the election campaign and beforehand that expressed that sentiment to me. People have been let down for so long, and restoring their trust requires us to show that we can make a difference, and we will. The new government has already made significant steps forward in fixing the foundations of our public services after the Conservatives left them in decay and decline. For a start, this government has delivered a budget that has stabilised the economy, preventing a return to austerity after the Conservatives left the worst inheritance for a new government since World War II. We've announced a much-needed £22 billion increase in our NHS budget, after we were left with record waiting lists.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms Harris. And I would like to begin by congratulating the organiser of this petition, my constituent in Kingswinford and South Staffordshire, Michael Westwood. The Honourable Lady for Bolton, South and Walkden suggested that this petition was motivated by political partisanship. She seemed to suggest that it was the result of foreign interference. As far as I know, Mr Westwood is not and has never been a member of any political party. I'm very happy to give way.
Yasmin Qureshi.
What I said was misinformation, as well as foreign interference, as well as criticising. So it's three things I mentioned, not just one.
Mike Good.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's entirely helped her case. There's certainly no reason to imagine that Mr Westwood was in any way influenced by any foreign state or other foreign actor. What he is the owner of a small business in in just a moment, in the Black Country, who has seen the impact of Labour's broken promises it's already having on his businesses and businesses like his, and on the wider economy. So I think the Honourable Lady really does owe Mr Westwood an apology, which I hope she will deliver in private after this debate. But if she wishes to deliver it in public during the debate, I'll of course give way.
Thank you very much. At no time did I say the individual constituent was being influenced by foreign. No, I did not say that. What I said is that the petition on its own, as it's sold, has been motivated by a number of factors, but not at any time did I attribute anything to the individual constituent of yours.
Thank you, Ms Qureshi. I think your point has been made and noted.
Yes, I think the words speak for themselves. Mr Westwood is literally sitting there, having brought the petition forwards, having gained those 3 million signatures, the signatures that reflect the strength of public dissatisfaction, frustration and betrayal with this Labour government's failure to uphold the promises it made during the election campaign. Political parties are elected based on manifestos that outline their vision, their commitments to the public. When those promises are not fulfilled, or worse, are abandoned, then trust between the electorate and the government erodes. Voters invest not only their votes, but also their hopes for the future in the government they elect. Where those promises are broken, as they so clearly have been here, where those hopes are dashed by the government going back on that platform on which they were so recently elected, then people have every right to feel betrayed. They feel betrayed by a government that categorically promised to not increase national insurance contributions, but within months had hiked that very tax, threatening wage growth for workers and hammering small businesses in particular. They feel betrayed by a Prime Minister who challenged his predecessor at PMQs to rule out restricting winter fuel payments, but within weeks of entering Downing Street, he took those same payments away from 90% of pensioners. They feel betrayed by a government that promised to not change agricultural property relief, but then scaled back that relief, putting family farms, many of which have been farmed for generations, at risk. And they feel betrayed by a government that promised to deliver the fastest growing economy in the G7, but that took an economy that was actually growing faster than other countries in the G7 and turned it into one with no growth at all. The Labour Party knew full well what the situation was before the election, yet they cynically chose not to make their unpopular plans public. They waited until they were in power. Rather than being honest with the public in advance, they ducked their choice, they took the easy route instead. Now, few people will imagine that this petition or this debate might lead to an early election. Sadly, it's not going to happen. But this petition is another clear sign of the betrayal felt by so many voters and the collapse in the trust and the support that this government was lent last summer. Well said.
Shadow Minister Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Harris, for chairing today. It's a pleasure to see you in your position there. And I'd like to also extend my thanks, as many others have done, to the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross for the way in which he kicked off the petition debate today. But I'd also like to thank Michael Westwood, who's sitting in the gallery, for putting forward the topic for this debate. He has clearly caught the public mood with 3 million people in the petitions. Now, I know, Ms Harris, I shouldn't be referring to him, but I think given the amount of people who have caught the public mood and signed up to his petition, and I would just caution some of the members of the opposition who today, I remember one of them said, this is a debate on a pointless motion. Over 3 million people have signed up to this debate. Over 3 million people have signed up to it because they're really concerned about what the government's doing. I can understand why the Honourable Member for Gateshead Central and Wickham wants to move on from talking about whether Labour has fulfilled its manifesto commitments or not, and instead let's just try and move on and get away from this idea of a blame game, because there is a real concern here out there in the public that people were misled ahead of the general election this time. The Father of the House, I think, could have put it really well when he said that the government really should listen to people's frustrations, because these are real frustrations out there, up and down the country, when it comes to small businesses or family farms or ordinary working people or pensioners, thousands of whom have written to me in my own constituency about the concerns that they face. And while no one should be in doubt that the government elected 6 months ago is obviously unlikely to be facing a general election anytime soon, we should all acknowledge that the massive public support that this petition had gained, with 3 million signatures, and also honourable members opposite should also realise that we are now over 10% into their time in office, and if they don't start listening to the public, it might be 10% of their entire time in this place. Within my own constituency of Basildon and Billericay, seeing over 6,000 people sign up. Nearby friends and my right honourable friends from Raleigh and Wickford and Malden, even more. It is clear that the public feeling behind this position is actually based on the government's significant early failures. And that is an understandable perspective, given the government's primary method of governing so far has been consistently to break their biggest promises and then blame everyone else. As my honourable friend, member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk said, promises broken, I think it can reasonably be argued, in a manner that implies contempt for the public and has been highly damaging for the trust in this government. This government's failure and its broken promises started early, Madam Chairman. It was on the morning of the 5th of July that the new Prime Minister walked up to the door of Downing Street and talked about a government of service. Looking on with a new pass and new access was Labour major donor Lord Ali. From the off, it has been clear that the promises of integrity, accountability and transparency by this government have been broken. From the literal first day of the Labour government, the public cannot help but feel Labour was selling out and selling them short. Soon after, it came to light that this Labour government was using exceptional civil service appointment procedures to put Labour donors and activists into what fundamentally are meant to be politically neutral positions. And the sense that this government, even in its first few weeks, was systematically destroying the mechanisms that hold an elected government to account for the interests of the whole public, not just sits particularly difficultly with the people in this House, but I think sits badly with the public at large as well.
Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to see you. And I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for introducing this debate today. This petition has succeeded already in a very important way because it has brought this debate to Westminster Hall this evening. And it's a broader debate, actually, than often we end up being able to have, and it's been passionately argued on both sides with some important points made. I was particularly struck by some of the points made by the member for Gateshead, Central and Wickham. And he is absolutely right that representative democracy can do some things that social media and other fora cannot, and it's why it's so important that we do have these debates in this place and that governments are held properly to account and give an account of themselves. Look, there are always people who are unhappy with a government, always people who are going to be unhappy with an incoming government. But the speed of the fall of this current government really is quite striking. There were very, very high hopes for this new Labour government, and they have been very, very speedily dashed. Now, no petition in our system can force a general election. That is all about the decision of the Prime Minister of the day, or if he or she is forced by a vote of confidence. But I do hope, genuinely, that the government will reflect on the scale of this petition, because we have lots of petition debates, lots of petitions get made to this Parliament, but the scale of this one and the rapidity with which signatures have been gathered is truly striking. In East Hampshire, 5,288 signatures by the start of the year. And people in East Hampshire feel particularly let down by things like the family farm tax, which is going to undermine the whole structure of agriculture in our area, which underpins the rural economy and society, with business rates, which was painted as a cut, but actually is an increase, particularly for retail and hospitality businesses, which will undermine the small businesses in our market towns and our village centres. The unrealistic housing targets that are being visited upon the countryside, even while cities like London will have their housing targets cut. And of course the hike in employer national insurance contributions painted as not being a tax on working people, when everybody knows that in the end such a tax can only see through either in the wages that people are paid or in the level of employment, and that will harm jobs locally. And of course scrapping the winter fuel payment right down to a very, very low income level. It is always, when you judge a government, it's always not just about what was in their manifesto that you judge them on. It was things that were not in their manifesto which they did anyway, and the most striking of those with this government so far has indeed been the winter fuel payment. This was a Blair-era reform that's been kept ever since, and throughout all the years, from 2010 through to 2015 and beyond, when we had to make some really difficult decisions, by the way, facing a 155 billion black hole inherited from the previous Labour government. For all those incredibly difficult decisions, one thing that was never touched was the winter fuel payment, because it is a particularly well targeted, not in terms of the number of people, but in terms of the time of year, for an expense that is that comes to older people right in the middle of winter, exactly when they need it. And in the budget, we heard for weeks from the Chancellor about the importance of economic growth. It was something I think everyone on our side, we all agreed with. It was fantastic to hear. Of course, economic growth ultimately is what matters, for not only for driving the economy, but for affording the excellent public services that we all value so much. There was a reasonable expectation that it was going to be the most growth-focused budget we had ever had in this country. And so a huge disappointment then when there were no major growth-driving measures in the budget at all, and in fact, the budget saw the forecast for growth actually fall. And everything this government has done has been continually focused on this supposed £22 billion black hole, which is itself, by the way, a mix of one-off items and recurring items, so it can't be considered a single figure at all. But in any case, look, whenever you're a government minister, you come into a new department, on your day one or day two briefing, you get told the long list of unfunded in-year spending pressures. That's not a black hole. It's a management challenge. It's what you have to deal with. It is what you have to deal with as a government minister in any department or at a macro level at the Treasury. And you make choices about how you do it, and you'll be held to account for those choices. Now, even in this 24-hour media and social media age, government is still not actually a popularity contest. And most governments will look over a 4 or 5 year period and they will try to do the unpopular things in year one, the difficult things, in the hope and expectation that they will yield positive results later. The difference this time around is when we look at what this government has done in year one, it is difficult to see how that is going to yield great results further down the line. I talked at the start about high hopes being dashed. I think actually that would certainly be true not only for members of the public but for Labour activists and indeed for Labour MPs. I think there had been a belief that just by being a Labour government things would improve, and I wonder if when they look back they might regret adopting that as their anthem. Things can only get better. It isn't true. It is all about the decisions that you make, and I hope this government, reflecting on this petition and this petition debate, will take the opportunity to rethink some of it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Anyway, what was the other thing that I did think is about that winter fuel payment? I didn't actually realise that it was the last Labour government, 2010 or whenever it was, that introduced it, and it's actually been withdrawn by Labour government. And apparently the Conservatives were thinking of increasing this winter fuel payment for the older people. So it does seem a bit of a bizarre decision to withdraw it, because apparently if you've got pension credit you can still claim it, but apparently if everybody claimed it that could claim it, they'll be paying out more money than if they just paid it out anyway. So it just literally doesn't make sense. And then the people that get it, that don't necessarily need it, will probably go out and spend it anyway, so it will boost the economy. And then the other thing that I think nobody really knows, I found out the other day, that if you actually wanted to literally give the money back to the government, you could do so. You can, there is actually a form you can fill out, and you can actually effectively donate. You can't say where the money's going to go to, but you can actually give the money back to the Treasury. And I might do a little thing to try and find out, because one year I think nobody gave any money back to the government. Well, why would you? And then another year I think there was £500 or something like this. I might do it myself just for the experience of filling out and give them £1, because that'd be quite irritating. That they'll have to, especially if I send them a cheque as well, because it'll cost them more money to pay in the cheque. Anyway, if you do put a comment as to what you think, and do subscribe if you do think that's appropriate, if you've managed to get this far in the video. Thank you.